This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
Cooking to me is giving. I'm not very good I couldn't be on the floor. I'm hopeless at talking to people. But I give through what I put on a plate. And this is what Beckett's is to me, where it's a vehicle. The building gives to you when you walk in. I've had so many people just say they walked in and you've forgotten where you are. You could be in anywhere around the world.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. One of the beautiful things to re-emerge over the last few years is the humble bistro. Once the cornerstone of the restaurant industry, a great bistro relies on classic dishes, a warm, inviting space, and stellar staff to create the very essence of hospitality. Few do it better than today's guest. Jeff Schroeter is the chef and co-owner of Beckett's in Glebe. Jeff, how are you?
Good, thank you.
It's good to get you on the show. You've opened in a suburb that's had a lot of hit and misses over the years in Glebe. What's things like there for Beckett's?
Well, I wasn't anticipating opening in Glebe. It kind of chose me. I was chasing a restaurant in the city, and I missed out on one place, and then this one just fell in my lap to say, go and have a look. So I did. It was shut for a year and a half, so I walked in and it just kept me there. It just gave me a hug when I walked in the door.
Well, there's some real amazing restaurants that have opened in Glebe and some interesting buildings as well. Tell us about the space and what attracted you to it.
It's not historic, but it's made of sandstone. It's been it was a church abbey that burnt down in the back laneway, and it was reclaimed, all the sandstone, all the arches from the church, all the stone. And the person that owned the building was a dentist, and he loved eating all around the world, and he decided, he didn't actually know he decided, but he ended up building a restaurant with all that reclaimed stone that was in the back lane, using the same stonemasons that were cleaning up the old church site. So it took 13 years to build. We still haven't got the full story of 2 master stonemasons, and it was dug out. It was all dirt, so it was dug out.
That's extraordinary. And what did you have to do to turn it into, what we see today with Beckett's?
Well, it was built purposely as a restaurant. It was Darling Mills back in the 80s, 90s, and it was a famous restaurant because it was one of the first paddock to plate restaurants, and they still have their farm where they're growing all the micro herbs, all the lettuces and all that for all the top restaurants in town. And it's called Darling Mills. They're still at the markets, so they're still going. So I was actually up there 2 weeks ago to visit their farm.
Well, that paddock to plate ethos is a real feature of, not just this venue, but your whole career. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing where you are in regards to that.
Well, it comes about because I grew up in the country. I grew up in a town of 600 people, and it was all farmland. So back when I was born, you didn't have supermarkets, ready, available. So you grew everything, and you ate everything that you had. And someone could grow beautiful tomatoes, and you bartered with them with pumpkins or eggplant or whatever, and then chickens and lamb and cattle. And so you just ate what you grew, and that was the whole ethos. So I haven't known anything different from that. Seafood was a bit hard to get because we're landlocked.
Do you remember any sort of particular feasts or dishes from when you were growing up?
Most definitely. When I have 52 first cousins, so we come from big families. So whenever there was a 50th or a wedding or a 21st, and all the families get together in a homestead somewhere on a Saturday night, and so all the aunties will be in the big homestead kitchens cooking, and they'll be on charcoal fires still in these big cast iron ovens on the homesteads. The men will be out roasting a whole lamb or a pig on the spit, drinking beers. And as a young kid, I'll be running around their legs in the kitchen and all, just around the food. But what rubbed up, licking the spoons and all that, and just looking up over the counters and just watching what they were doing, unbeknown to me at that stage of why I liked food, it was the energy I liked. It was rubbing off on me, but it's a sense of occasion, because when you sat down, big tables just full of food, and people were just laughing and eating and carrying on. And I think that's what rubbed off on me, was cooking was a sense of occasion.
What was it like for you when you first started cooking for real in a kitchen and began your career?
It was interesting. I was a carpenter when I first left school. So I did my building apprenticeship. I was a carpenter, and then the building industry collapsed. And that was in the early 80s. And being a country boy, I said, I might just drive to Brisbane. There's a beach there. And, just have a look at something else. So my cousin and I, we packed up and just drove in an old EHU, went to Brisbane and found there was no beach. But that was the start. So we said, okay, what do we do? So I was just working out what I wanted to be. From there, it was a good time to reevaluate. And I thought, I'll give food as a passion. I'll try food. So I went and applied, found a job in a cafe in the city, and just to see if I would like it, and then started hunting around all the best restaurants in Brisbane to work in to get an apprenticeship.
Tell us about where you landed and the sort of really important venues and people you worked with early on that helped sort of create the path for you.
Yeah. So I ended up finally getting a apprenticeship at a restaurant called Restaurant Beckett. It was a French restaurant. It was on Racecourse Road in Hamilton, and it was there for about 8 years before I come along. And the head chef was called Max Matter, and he was also a teacher at TAFE, at the where you did your schooling for cooking. And the reason I loved it is because of his personality. He was kind, he was giving, he shared, and he would help you, because as a first year you knew nothing, so he nurtured you. And I found that was very important, to always work for someone that you respect, or otherwise there's no use working. And so working for him gave me a great grounding, even though I was a complete novice at it. He had time to actually work with me.
After you started your career and worked with him, where did you go?
From there, I went to the equivalent of the Opera House in Brisbane. It was a performing arts centre. I went there. It was a new place opened. The head chef was Kiwi, but he'd travelled all around the world. And so again, it was the experience of working in a bigger kitchen, a newer kitchen, and doing different things. We're doing just like the Opera House. And but again, they were very helpful in your learning and understanding. So I finished my apprenticeship there. And from there, I then travelled to Sydney and got a job with Serge Dansereau at the Regent Hotel. And so I was there for roughly a year. So it's the first time I'd come to Sydney. So I drove down, thought, well, why not give Sydney a go?
What were your thoughts on Sydney at the time compared to what you were used to?
Well, again, it's another step up. Serge is a brilliant chef, but a brilliant person. And again, and the people in there, Dietmar Soy was also the executive sous chef, which went on to do his own thing then. So you're working with these people at the skill level, but there was a properly run kitchen. the stress level was just to work on the food. It wasn't to do with any politics. It was food orientated. Just do the best you can and improve as you go along. So it was a good kitchen to be nurtured in.
Do you have any stories of the influence that Serge had on you?
Just his calmness. You go to the chef's office for a quick chat, and he'll have time to chat to you. And there'll be other chefs running around, but he would spend time just to say hi, how things, if you're all right. I've come across Serge years later when I came back to Australia, and again, he's still the same personality of, he's very nurturing and just a nice guy.
You mentioned that you left Australia. Tell us about that period of time. You sort of travelled all around the world. What were some of the really big moments for you that helped shape you?
Well, from the region, I actually went back to the Gold Coast. It was called the Gold Coast International. And there was another head chef there called Herbert Klinkenhammer. He was a German, tough as nails, brutal. My first interview, didn't get hired, didn't like me. I didn't fill out the application form correctly. I think it went to a resume. I put C resume instead of filling it all out on the piece of paper. So that's how tough he was. And I went, oh, shit, I don't want to work for this idiot. But then I found that he has a reason for doing things. And when I spent about a year and a half with him. And yes, he was hard, he was tough, but he was also brilliant at what he did. And as a young kid, he wanted to make sure that, I didn't step out of line too much. And it was just their way of running things. But while I was there, I always had the bug to travel. And this opportunity, I applied 6 months ago I heard this through a Swedish friend that when she arrived, she came on a container ship. And it's a Wilhelmsen container ship that travels around the world. It takes 4.5 months to do a round trip. And so I applied 6 months earlier and then forgot about it. And then one day they rang me and said, are you still interested in traveling overseas? And I said, yes. And I said, well, we have a container ship in Sydney in 6 days' time. And there's a space for you if you want to get on. And I went, holy shit. So I went to the executive chef and said, this opportunity's come up. And he went, take it, which I thought was quite astounding. But, he said, no, take it. You need the experience overseas. Great way to get over there. So I hurriedly packed up everything I had, drove back down to where I grew up, dumped my car with my brothers, all my possessions, and then got back to Sydney to hop on a container ship that I had no idea where I was going. The container ships are interesting. There's probably about 36 people on there. There's the Norwegian crew. Then there's a Filipino deckhands, and then the Indian engineers. So it's kind of like nationalities and different things. And they travel this world. They're 2 weeks behind each other, just traveling around 4.5 months around trips. And I hopped on there going, I have no experience at the ocean, no idea what I'm doing. And I was on this container ship, leaving Sydney heads and going all around the world. So went through everywhere, through Japan, South Korea, all the way from East Coast to West Coast of America. Spent 11 days straight at sea, was the longest trip. Luckily, we missed all the storms. Went around a cyclone in Singapore, I think. Things like that. But it was an eye-opener.
What was the food like on the ship?
It was brilliant. Well, then the captain found out I was a chef. So we had 2 Indian cooks in the kitchen, brilliant cooks, but he was Norwegian. He loved Western food, and so he found out I was a chef. So then he worked out, okay, instead of just being a deckhand, repainting and so forth, he said, you hop in the kitchen and cook me some food. So I was making scones for him, and I was cooking. When we got to Miami, we were a day early, so he sent the crew in to pick up 36 lobsters, live lobsters, and bring them back and get me to cook them for them. So we had an in-ground swimming pool on the deck. So we set up, they built a barbecue and we cooked the lobsters on the barbecue. I made all the dressings and salads. And so you could live, eat that food as well.
Take us on, you mentioned you sort of visited all sorts of countries. Do you have any sort of highlights and experiences that influenced and shaped you as a chef while you were travelling?
Well, I was traveling, it's just absorbing. You try live prawns hopping off your plate in South Korea was interesting. It's the first time. So the crew used to take me on shore when we were at anchor. Would stay from 12 hours to 3 days at port. And then the crew will be working, and then they'll take me in town to their favourite places and show me their food and so forth. So it was a great experience just to see how all the cultures work together without knowing where you're going. I didn't have to plan a thing, thank goodness, because I wouldn't know what to plan. I just tagged along and they protected me and looked after me. So it was great. But the food, the food's good wherever you go. It's just, the experience of absorbing it. So I went over, hopped off in London, completely broke, spent all the money on the cruise ship, and then knocked on the Savoy door. 3 interviews later, I started 2 days later and started working at the Savoy. So I stayed there for a year and a half, and then I went to Switzerland. There was people I used to work with back in Brisbane, did the Expo 88, which is the Swiss pavilion there. He had a restaurant back in St. Gallen in Switzerland. They come over to London, invited me to come over to Switzerland. So I went there and worked there for 6 months, travelled for 6 months and worked again for 6 months. I had a combi van, cruised all through and ended up in Cyprus with a cameraman from the BBC that I knew. And then back to Switzerland, and then from there to New York. So I stayed in New York for a while before coming back to Australia.
How different were those kitchens and experiences compared to, the beginnings of your career in Australia?
They were similar. The Savoy was the hardest kitchen I ever worked in the world. It was just physically demanding. It was physically tough. It was confronting. There was physical fights between chefs. When you have 60 chefs in one kitchen, there's things that break, and that's usually people. The mise en place, you spend hours and hours on mise en place. It goes missing from the communal cold room. You got to hunt around. Butter and cream was like liquid money to get something done from another section. If you have cream or butter and they don't have any, it's like a bargaining chip. So you learn to stand for yourself. And before, I was always didn't like confrontation, but the Savoy taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. It was brilliant food. It was very classic. You can still see Escoffier's ovens in the banquet rooms. That sense of history in that place was immense, working on the Strand. But then I was spending 18 hours a day in the kitchen, 16 to 18. So you didn't get to experience much life outside of the kitchen.
You mentioned that from Europe you went to Manhattan. How different was that, and what sort of experiences did you have there?
Yeah, well, Manhattan was just completely different to London. Everyone knows that. It was just go, go, go. It's just, you didn't know if you're safe. Living in Manhattan itself was brilliant, but you just didn't know if you're safe or not. As a kid from the bush, you just don't know what's right, what's wrong. You just have to keep your head down and just, look like you've been there all your life. And then people will leave you alone. I end up securing a job in a fashionable hotel that was the hit of the town at the time, which was a Royalton. It was an Ian Schrager hotel. Used to own Studio 54 in the heyday and things like that. It was the first boutique hotel in the world, funnily enough. This is where they come up with the boutique hotel concept, and Ian Schrager was the first pioneer of that. And so the hotel didn't you didn't have many windows looking out. It was in mid-Manhattan, high-rise, but it was all built internally. And this is where all the fashion and all the models and all the celebrities and the movie stars like to stay, because it was secure of peace and quiet. And it was just like an underground hotel of these particular people. And so it was an eye-opener. You're feeding celebrities all the time and you didn't even know it. But the stories you hear, it was just brilliant. So it was an eye-opener of the wealth of Manhattan as well as the food. We could spend a lot of money on the fresh produce and just put really good food on a plate. And the chef was brilliant in his own concept. He was the first American to make a senior sous chef in a French restaurant around the world, or something like that. So he's on TV. His name's Jeffrey Zakarian. He's been on MasterChef there and so forth. But his technique was taking the classics and then making them lighter or making them fresher. So you weren't using as much butter or much cream. And you're making the main ingredient really stand out. And that's what rubbed off on me a lot. So when you eat salmon, instead of having a cream sauce like the Savoy used to do, it was a lemon and olive oil sauce, and you had crushed cucumber, and so all those flavours lifted the heaviness of the fat of the salmon and cleaned it right up. And all of a sudden, I tasted salmon for the first time there. Compared to everywhere else in the world, when I ate that dish, I said I have to learn more. And that's why I stayed so long.
You mentioned working there, you had to cook for lots of celebrities. Do you have any stories for yourself of cooking for celebrities?
Well, Madonna was part owner of the sister hotel that they built down Miami, which was the Delano Hotel. So it was on Main Beach. Ian Schrager designed it. Where the Royalton in New York was dark and kind of velvety, Miami was all white. You woke up in the morning, the only colour in the place was you and an apple on the wall, a green apple. Everything was white. You'd wake up and think you're dead. You go, shit, what happened? I'm dead. So it was built the opposite. And Madonna was a part owner somewhere in the hierarchy of the whole thing, but she had a birthday coming up, so she booked out the whole hotel when it first opened. And she would have had 65 guests there, blocked it all out, security all around. It was for the weekend. And she flew in 4 chefs from all over America to cook her favourite dishes in each of those places. And I was one of them. They flew in to do her salmon dish that we used to do at the Savoy, at the Royalton, I should say. And so I was down there for 3 days to cook one dish for 60 people, which took probably 6 hours work. So I was having a great time, because when I flew in, the head chef took me to a tobacco shop, rolled back the big fake door, and it's just full of Cuban cigars. And I've always wanted to try smoking Cuban. And so he picked out 4 different cigars, and we went back, sat around the pool at Miami at the hotel, and smoked cigars.
Wow. Well, what did you take from your time in Manhattan?
Everything can be achieved in Manhattan, and everything can be busted in Manhattan. So, you can, if you do it right, you can do anything in Manhattan illegally, but you can do anything if you're persistent enough. So I've seen the people involved in this hotel, a lot of very talented people in different positions. One is general manager, one owns a restaurant, one that built the hotel, the designer. They're all individually brilliant at what they do, and it's combining the brilliance together to make a product, which was a hotel, which taught me a lot. It's like not one person can do everything. So you got to find that brilliance from other people as well, and just you got to have the same page to work on to make something bigger than each individual.
Was it hard coming back to Australia? Tell us about that move back home.
Oh, yes. It, coming back to Australia, was it slowing down again? The pace was far different. The food was stepping back again in time. Um, I just had to bide my time and just work on getting back into it. I was probably not that good of employee when I first come back because I had my own opinions and working for different people were clashing slightly. And so I just had to learn to kind of scale it back a little.
What did you do when you first arrived back? Where did you work?
I worked at called The Edge, and it was Gary Skelton was a sous chef at the Regent before I left, and he was a head chef back at The Edge. It was a pizza joint and Riley Street that was doing brilliant pizzas, but then also doing other food as well. And so I got a job there for a little while, just to ease back into, or not ease back, but just try to see, but it wasn't enough. So then I ended up at Bistro Moncur with Damien Pinelay, which was brewing again. Just making your own boudin noir, making all your sausages and so forth. And it was working back in a nice, great bistro kitchen that was always busy. Good chefs in there. And it was nice to still try to ease back into it. The food wasn't what I was doing in New York, but I was, again, learning. You always learn something. So working with Damien was brilliant.
Damien's influence over many decades has been extraordinary, and that continues on with the Josephine Pinulé Award for the next generation. Do you have any stories of what it was like working with him?
It was more after, about 10 years after I left there, for a charity event, there was a caviar prize, and people bid for it as for a charity. And so then Damien, it was part of Damien to turn up at someone's house to actually do a caviar tasting, and I was involved with the chefs to work with Damien to do it as well. So it was a cross promotion kind of thing as a charity prize. So I got to work shoulder to shoulder with Damien again 10 years later, and that was so, because I was probably too young and naive when I first worked with him, that after some more experience and where I knew where I fit in the world of things for food-wise and all that it was nice to just share moments with him in that kitchen while we're just cooking doing different caviar dishes for this particular prize. And that was more rewarding for me than meeting him 10, 15 years later.
You spent time at Bayswater Brasserie as well, one of the most important restaurants in Sydney's history. What was that like for you?
That was kind of that was taking a kitchen that was needed to revamp itself again. It was kind of a bit tired, so I was put in there. The chef that was running it walked out as soon as I walked in, which put me on the back foot straight away. I had to then rehire straight away and work out what the hell we're doing, and reinvent everything without losing its soul. It's the first time I hired, put an ad in. This chef walked in, hired him straight away just by his personality. And this gentleman's with me now at Bayswater still. He comes and does his own thing. And then when I opened Bayswater, he said, "No, I'm back in there." Brilliant man. But it's also where Bayswater taught me how to drink, meaning Charlie Ainsbury was in the bar, which is one of Australia's best barmen back then. But you don't drink excess, or you don't. It's watching him make a cocktail and said, "Now try this," and you can taste the nuances of that cocktail by him explaining it. Taught me that there's a lot more to it than just having a margarita or having a martini. And so Bayswater taught me how to drink properly, which then combined to put it with food. So it was interesting. I didn't know at the time either, but Charlie taught me how to drink properly so I could eat properly. And that was interesting because not because I was just used to wine with food, but not a cocktail, and or pre or after. And so it really rounded out the experience of food for me, which is interesting.
You've been involved in so many restaurants and projects and all sorts of things. What's been the real sort of standout for you sort of in the last decade with what you're doing that's sort of steered you in the direction you've gone?
It was, well, I was open Chicane, which was a little restaurant off Oxford Street. It was a big little restaurant. And as a head chef, being able to cook what I was taught in New York, to actually have a place, to have a vehicle to actually start experimenting and putting it on for Australian palates, was quite a change for me. That was where, okay, the passion started to come out. But it took 25 years before I really knew my own style. And so I went through a few different restaurants. I had another one in the city called Eat City. I had it for 3 years before the building was sold, where I was doing French yum cha, where you've got a whole list of items on the menu, and you could have 2 people, you can have 10 people at your table, and you just choose, we'll have the prawns, we'll have the scallop, we'll have the pate, and I would make for 10 people, and they'll be sharing. So it'll be shared concept. So it'll be someone had to play mum and serve, and it was great for business meetings to watch the boss actually serving their guests and so forth, and it was quite interactive for them. So it was a bit of a scaling back of the classics. It was just more easy and for the customer, and so was the wine, because we could then use a lot of variants in wines. We could use a lot more aromatic wines than just a straight Chardonnay and the red wine. We can bring in a lot more variety, and so the sommelier floor manager was getting so excited with that as well, and it was a great concept. And this is what I was planning to do with Beckett's, funnily enough, until she tricked me, the building. But this is where I was coming into my own again. So I could put on things that I wanted to play with without having it be perfected, if that's the right word. I didn't have to have it down to its finite brilliance, where a lot of restaurants have to, because that's what you go for. They could forgive me for saying, well, I'm working on this dish, and they'll give interaction, say, well, maybe with this or maybe not with that, and I'll be listening to them. And so it was evolving all the time.
You mentioned it took quite a while to find your own voice on the plate. Tell me a little bit about your food, and maybe through a dish or two that sort of exemplifies your cookery.
Oh, good point. See, I can't define my food. I let other people do that. The reason is I don't want to put a definition on it. What I do love is when my supplier says, look, I've just got this, or the duck farmer comes and he's got these spatchcocks or squab, and I'm going, okay, let me work on that. So I have a squab dish I particularly love, and then it's with sautéed root veg, and so you cook the whole squab on the bone, and then you cut it off the bone and just finish searing it, so it comes out pink. The breast is pink, the legs cooked properly. But it goes on a root vegetable of say, parsnip, of celeriac, carrot, and so forth. But you cut up rhubarb and put that in at the last minute, and you saute each root veg with a little bit of vanilla bean, because the vanilla, the rhubarb, the root vegetable for the grounding, and then you've got the richness of the squab, which is like a stronger duck, and then you got the natural juices coming from that. When you put it on, the combination of flavors just go wow, because you got the acid, you got the root vegetable, you got the vanilla, and the earthiness. It just all works together, and that quite interests me. The one I particularly like, would just remind me another one, is foie gras. I do. We invented it in the Royalton by accident. It was a Sunday night. We ran out of, usually we'd caramelised figs or grapes or something like that. We had nothing left in the fridge. And the only thing we had was strawberries. And we're going, Jesus, what are we going to do? And so we poached strawberries with bay leaf and rosemary in a sugar syrup, and then roasted the strawberry to reheat it, and then reduce the syrup to like a glaze. And you sear the foie gras, put it with the strawberry, put the glaze with it, and then use an aged balsamic. And so the simple thing is you got fat from the foie, you got the acid from the balsamic with a slight sweetness, and then you got the sweetness from the sugar syrup and the strawberry. And it's just a match made in heaven. It's phenomenal. It could be a dessert, it could be a starter, it could be in the middle. It just works. It's a combination that is just, to me, is simplicity on a plate.
You've been involved in so many restaurants, but you opened Beckett's, during one of the most challenging periods of time for the industry and everyone on the planet as well. What's it been like, sort of opening a restaurant during this time?
Yeah, it's you just don't know what's coming. It was interesting. So I saw Beckett's during the first lockdown. I walked in and just went, okay, looked at all we call it the bones of the building, the restaurant, food in to food out to garbage out kind of thing. You look at what it takes to actually move food around in a restaurant. And it was all there. It was built properly. And I went, thank goodness, because most places aren't. And that frustrates me a lot, because you have to add more labour to actually try and do good food in a badly designed restaurant. You can't do actually good food in a bad restaurant, in design-wise. That stops you from doing good food. So Beckett's, I walked in and it was just there. So I said, okay. And I just went, well, bugger it, give it a go. I didn't want to think too much about it, because the more you think, the more problems you come up with. But I knew walking through without any tables and chairs, you could feel there was enough space in there, even in environment where you've got to be 4 meters apart. We could still do, a good number of seats to make the overheads work. And so I just said, right. And then I thought I was going to do French yum cha again. That was my concept. I thought, Glebe, it's in the suburb. Maybe they don't want fine dining. I don't want to do fine dining. And so the first night we opened, we were busy. But the thing, before we started serving, is the first time I'd seen the place with the lights on at dark and fully dressed, with the tables dressed. And I remember this vividly. I walked out of the kitchen because I was busy prepping for 2 days, and I had people setting up the restaurant. I had the designers there, my business partner there, and the place was finished. And I walked out of the kitchen and looked at the restaurant and went, shit, it's dressed up. I went, my food's wrong, completely wrong. My whole menu is wrong here. But I had to do it. Lucky it was a private event, and we were just doing friends and family. But that night I had to go home after serve, and I had to change the whole menu that night. And because my wife laughs at me, because 6 months were there reshaping the place, and there's an entity there. I call it there was a ghost there, and she kept haunting it, stalking everyone, and she would argue with me on, that light won't work, or things would happen that just be quirky. But all the other staff that I had, some skeleton staff there, were all shit scared to go downstairs on their own, because they reckon that, she's down there, things were happening. And I said, no, she's all right. My wife to this day says, yes, she's been there a while. She was looking for someone like you to come along, redo the place. And then she tricked me she dressed up and put heels on and lipstick. And that's that vivid memory of walking out the kitchen and seeing it fully dressed. And I went, shit, I've got the wrong food. She's dressed up. And that's what I mean by she dressed up on me. And so I had to go back and say, okay, now I have to rework the food to make it fit the environment we're in now. So when I go to a restaurant, when I'm looking at a new restaurant, I don't know what food I'm going to do. It tells me. But this one really shouted at me. And since I've changed all that, she's left me alone. She's gone now. Either she's resting in peace or she's left the building. It's quite interesting.
Your business partner is playwright and director Wendy Beckett. What's the dynamic like between you two in regards to running the restaurant?
Interesting. She likes a show and theatre, whereas I like practicality and organisation. So there's a contrast of the two. So we have different nights where downstairs she does a theatre vignettes where she's got a famous actor or actress. They come in and do 20 minutes in between a 4-course meal. And that works really well. So it's like live theatre. They're sitting around and she's performing right there on something that's either at the Opera House or Belvoir or so forth. So that gives her creative passion and also where I'm feeding them. So it's dinner and show, but it's more, dinner and show. But the show is like 20 minutes. So that's good for her. And then upstairs is where I'm just rolling with what I can find from the markets.
Well, it's amazing what you've created there. What do you love about what you do?
The sense, it goes back to my childhood. It's a sense of occasion, of cooking for someone. Cooking to me is giving. I'm not very good I couldn't be on the floor. I'm hopeless at talking to people. But I give through what I put on a plate. And this is what Beckett is to me, where it's a vehicle. The building gives to you when you walk in. I've had so many people just say they walked in and you've forgotten where you are. You could be in anywhere around the world. You forget the outside. It's quite interesting when you walk back out after 3 hours or 4 hours and you walk back out in the street, you go, holy shit. I mean, reality again. So once they come in, it disarms you from your worldly troubles, and then it lets my food be able to sustain you. The food, it makes my job easier, which is a nice thing to have for a building. I don't have to catch up and make up on when they kind of relax walking into the place, which is nice.
Well, Jeff, I know we've only really skimmed the surface on your incredible career, and congrats on what you're doing at Beckett's. Please keep in touch, and we'll have to catch up again soon.
Most certainly. It's lovely talking to you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.